My wife cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend. I humiliated her in front of her family and handed her divorce papers. Never in my life did I imagine I would be living a nightmare like this. It is the kind of thing you hear about in passing or see on social media, but experiencing it firsthand feels like your entire world is falling apart. My name is John, and I am just an ordinary man. I work as a professor at a university, and until recently, I thought I had a happy life. I was married to my wife, Emily, for 10 years, and we have 2 wonderful boys. Emily and I first met at a family gathering. My aunt nudged my mom, saying I should ask her out. Back then, I was not much into dating. I was completely consumed by my studies and working on my doctorate. But when I saw Emily, something about her caught my attention. She was beautiful, graceful, and had a smile that could light up a room. It felt like fate was playing matchmaker, with our parents already chatting excitedly at the party, hoping we would hit it off. Our first date was unforgettable. Emily was bubbly and full of life, and we clicked instantly. She was in dental school at the time, and I admired her drive. What started as one date turned into a year of dating, and before long, we were married. Life with her was everything I had hoped for. She was an amazing wife and a loving mother to our boys. For a decade, I thought I had found my happily ever after. Then, a month ago, everything changed. Looking back, I should have asked more questions about her past. I never doubted her once during our marriage, but that blind trust began to crumble one random evening. Emily came home from her clinic at her usual time, or so I thought. I had tried calling her earlier, but she did not answer. At first, I brushed it off, thinking she must be busy with patients. But something felt off, so I decided to call her clinic. The receptionist casually mentioned that Emily had not been in that day. My stomach twisted in knots. I stayed up all night, pacing the floor and imagining the worst. When she finally walked in after midnight, she looked exhausted. I was ready to ask her what was going on, but before I could get a word out, she mumbled something about a busy day at work and went straight to bed. Her words stung. She had just lied to my face, and I knew it. I stood there, unable to process what had just happened. Exhausted and confused, I tried to sleep but could not. When I eventually went to check on her, she was still in her work clothes, passed out on the bed. I gently lifted her legs onto the bed and covered her with a blanket. That is when I noticed the smell alcohol. Emily, who had never touched a drink in 10 years, reeked of it. I did not confront her that night. Instead, I left for work early the next morning, hoping to sort through my feelings. When I got home that evening, her car was in the driveway. As I walked up the porch, I noticed her through the window. She was texting someone, her face lighting up with a smile. The moment I stepped inside, she quickly put her phone down and busied herself helping our older son, Jake, with his homework. Her usual warm hugs and kisses were replaced with a distant hello. Something was definitely wrong. Later that night, I asked her to make me a cup of coffee. She brought it over, but she was distracted, texting someone again and smiling to herself. I tried to ignore it until I noticed her nearly spilling the coffee on our younger son, Ryan. Furious, I shouted at her for the first time in our marriage. She apologized profusely, but I told her we needed to talk. I sent the boys to play their video games so we could have a serious conversation. Instead of confronting her directly about her lies, I asked her who she was texting. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting us, and she looked panicked. After a long pause, she admitted that she had reconnected with an old friend and had gone out with them the night before. She tried to play it off as nothing, but I could see there was more to the story. Emily still did not tell me why she was not at the clinic that day, nor did she mention the alcohol. Whether you agree or not, hiding details is a form of betrayal, no matter how minor. What bothered me even more was that it was almost midnight, and she was still glued to her phone, chatting away. A month passed, and life moved on. I was caught up preparing exam questions for my students, and amidst the chaos, I failed to notice how things had been quietly spiraling. One night, around 4 a.m., I woke up to find her still up, scrolling and typing away on her phone. That was not unusual in itself, but what I overheard sent a chill down my spine. Honestly, no, it's not some dream marriage. He's so boring and stuck in his old ways. And the same plain, dull intimacy every time. I am just so over it. I need something more. I need some excitement. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. Am I really boring? Did I fail her as a husband? For 10 years, I thought I had made her happy. We had a stable home, 2 amazing kids, and a life I believed was filled with love. Was it all a lie? Who was she even texting? The Emily I knew was loving, thoughtful, and supportive. She used to bring me flowers and cuddle with me like I was her world. Hearing this side of her broke me. I slipped back into bed, pretending I had not heard a thing. A few moments later, I heard her footsteps approaching. She climbed under the blanket, wrapped her arms around me like nothing had happened, and fell asleep. As for me, I stayed wide awake, staring into the darkness, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Deep down, I just knew she was pulling away from me. After that night, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started paying closer attention to her actions. Every little thing she did seemed to confirm my fears. When a person hides small truths, it is often because they are covering something much bigger. The next morning, I felt like my head would explode from lack of sleep. Over breakfast, I casually offered to drive her to the clinic. She hesitated, then claimed she had a parent-teacher meeting at James's school. I did not argue, but I knew she was lying. That meeting was yesterday. I had already attended it. I let it slide and went to work. Later, on my way to the office, I received a call from her clinic. The receptionist sounded frustrated, asking why Emily had not shown up for the past 3 or 4 days. Patients were upset because they had scheduled appointments, and Emily was not answering calls or messages. My heart sank. This was more than just a passing issue. I decided to see for myself. I wrapped up my work early, handed some tasks over to my intern, and drove to her clinic. As expected, she was not there. I called her, and after a couple of rings, she finally picked up. She sounded startled. I told her I had stopped by, and she scrambled for an explanation, saying she was visiting a homebound patient to discuss a root canal procedure. It was an obvious lie. I checked with the receptionist, and there were no records of home visits. That night, I cooked dinner for the kids and went through my paperwork to request a few days off. I needed time to get to the bottom of this. At dinner, I casually asked James about the parent-teacher meeting. He looked puzzled and reminded me we had already attended it together. The look on Emily's face was priceless. She quickly recovered and claimed she just wanted to speak with the teacher about James's progress. I put my spoon down and looked her straight in the eyes. She asked me what was wrong. I sighed and asked if she had seen the progress report I had sent her. She stammered, apologizing, saying she had forgotten. I pressed on, asking how she could forget something so important when she was always on her phone. That set her off. She accused me of suggesting she spent all day doing nothing but texting. I told her she was misunderstanding me, but she snapped. She stood up, yelling that I never appreciated her or did anything for the family. Her words cut deep, but instead of reacting, I let her rant. Inside, I was boiling, but I knew I needed proof before I could confront her fully. When she finally snapped at me and called me boring, saying our marriage had lost its spark, I could only laugh. Thanks for twisting the conversation to suit your own narrative, I said calmly, picking up my fork and continuing to eat. Her words stung, but I was determined not to let her know. Later that evening, she walked out again, laughing and chatting on her phone. I did not want to eavesdrop on her calls. I wanted concrete proof. I had never once invaded her privacy, but her behavior left me no choice. That night, after she fell asleep, I reached for her phone. It was locked with a password, and I knew she would never tell me what it was. But Emily had a habit. She wrote everything down. I quietly went to her desk, opened her notebook, and there it was. My hands trembled as I keyed in the code and unlocked the phone. What I saw next shattered me. There, in the messages, was the ugly truth staring back at me. Sexting, explicit pictures, and I love you messages exchanged with a man named Richard. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. Tears streamed down my face as I scrolled through the messages, trying to stay quiet so I would not wake her. For the first time in years, I cried uncontrollably, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle the sound. I knew I needed evidence, so I took screenshots of everything, every message, every picture, and sent them to my phone. Then, I carefully deleted the screenshots from her gallery, ensuring she would not suspect anything. Just as I was about to put her phone back, I stumbled upon photos of them together. They looked so happy. Those pictures cut me to my core, but I sent them to myself and erased all traces of my actions. The next morning, I left the house like everything was normal, but instead of going to work, I drove to my best friend Elijah's place. Elijah and I had been close since childhood, and he had always been my rock. When I told him what was happening, he was in complete disbelief. "If you hadn't shown me proof, I'd think you were making this up," he said, shaking his head. After venting to Elijah, I decided to confirm everything. I had seen Richard's address in one of the messages, so I drove to his house in Elijah's car, parking discreetly behind some trees. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. After a while, I saw Richard walk out of the house with a bouquet of flowers. Moments later, Emily pulled up in her car. She got out, and they embraced like star-crossed lovers. I snapped a picture, my hands shaking with anger and heartbreak. I could barely stand to watch. If she had been honest with me, we could have ended things amicably. But no, she wanted to keep our family intact while living a double life. Her betrayal was more than just infidelity, it felt like an attack on the trust and stability I had spent years building. For the next 3 days, I followed her and gathered more evidence. Every encounter between her and Richard, every lie she told me, I documented it all. It was not just about proving her wrong, it was about preparing myself to confront her without giving her any room to twist the story. I also confided in our nanny, an old family friend who had always been loyal and trustworthy. She kept me updated on Emily's movements when I could not be there. One afternoon, she called to let me know she was leaving early to visit a sick relative. I decided to use that as a pretext to get Emily home. I called her and told her the nanny would not be around, so she needed to head back. She agreed without hesitation, which only confirmed her eagerness to keep up appearances. While discussing the situation with Elijah, I suddenly got a frantic call from Emily. She was crying, saying that Max had fallen off a ladder and broken his arm. My heart dropped. Panic overtook me, and I froze. Elijah had to drive me to the hospital because I was too shaken to manage. At the hospital, the doctor reassured us it was just a minor injury and that Max would recover in a few weeks. I kissed my son's forehead, feeling both relieved and heartbroken. While Emily called my mom to update her, I sat next to James and gently asked how the accident had happened. James hesitated for a moment but then said, "Max was climbing the ladder, and he called Mom so many times, but she didn't hear him because she was on the phone." Those words were like a knife to my chest. Even in a moment that required her attention, she was too distracted by her secret life. That was the final straw, when I heard James tell me that Max had called for Emily multiple times, only to be ignored while she chatted on the phone. A surge of anger overtook me. I walked straight to her, picked up her phone, and slammed it onto the floor. The noise drew everyone's attention in the hospital. I did not care. I was furious and shouted at her for being so irresponsible. Elijah tried to calm me down, but I was beyond reason. Max could have been seriously hurt, and her negligence pushed me over the edge. Emily, true to her nature, tried to turn the tables. She began playing the victim, claiming I was an absent father. I leaned in close and whispered in her ear, "At least I do not need someone else behind your back to feel fulfilled." Her face drained of color, and for the first time, she looked truly scared. After that heated argument, Elijah took the boys to his house, and Emily and I headed home in tense silence. She showed no genuine remorse, even texting on her phone during the drive back, which only fueled my rage. Later that night, Emily admitted something that turned my world upside down. She revealed that Richard was her high school boyfriend, and they had broken up just a month before our wedding. She said she had never wanted to marry me but felt she had no choice. Her father, a dentist who owned a prestigious clinic, had stipulated that Emily had to marry someone respectable to inherit it. If she did not, it would go to her younger brother, who was also studying dentistry. Richard, being jobless and unambitious at the time, was not an option, so she had chosen me instead. Emily explained that she reconnected with Richard a month ago when he came to her clinic for a cleaning before a photoshoot. He now worked as a model. One thing led to another, and their relationship reignited. Tears filled her eyes as she begged me for another chance, claiming she wanted to fix things. But I saw through her act. By then, she had realized Richard would never commit to her, and she was desperate to hold on to the stability of our family. She went on to say I was not her type and that she often felt confined in our marriage. Her words were like a dagger. I calmly asked, "So you are blaming me for your affair because of my personality?" She lashed out, yelling that I was not understanding and that Richard gave her what I could not. Her attempts to justify her betrayal infuriated me. I grabbed her by the arms and told her firmly, "Cheating is a choice you made, not something I drove you to." Unable to take any more of her lies, I walked out of the house and asked Elijah to take the boys to their grandparents while I stayed with him for a few days. At Elijah's place, I shut myself off from the world, refusing to talk about the situation. I needed time to process everything. After 3 days, I returned home. To my surprise, Emily had decorated the house with flowers and balloons, a blatant attempt to win me over. She stood there with a bouquet, apologizing profusely and begging for forgiveness. I felt no love for her, only hatred. But I played along, pretending to be swayed by her theatrics. Deep down, I knew she was still seeing Richard, as I had evidence of her weekly meetings with him. We hosted a small birthday party for Max, inviting close family members. Emily tried to make everything look perfect, but I saw through her facade. After the cake-cutting ceremony, I asked James and Max to go to another room to open their presents. With everyone gathered, I handed Emily's father a gift. I had prepared a folder containing all the evidence of her affair. Her father's face turned red with anger as he flipped through the photos and messages. He stood up, shouting at Emily for her recklessness and for tarnishing their family's reputation. Everyone was in shock. I then handed Emily her own gift, divorce papers. Her father demanded she sign them immediately, telling her she would no longer inherit the clinic and would need to find a job elsewhere. Emily broke down, begging for forgiveness, but her tears meant nothing to me. She had destroyed our marriage, and no amount of remorse could undo the damage. I made it clear that she could only see James and Max on weekends and would not be allowed to have them overnight due to her irresponsibility. After the divorce, we went our separate ways. Emily moved out of the house, and I focused on rebuilding my life. The boys missed her at times, but I knew they were better off with one reliable parent than with a negligent one. Slowly but surely, I found peace in my work and my children. While the scars of her betrayal will always remain, I found satisfaction in knowing I stood up for myself and my family. The revenge might not have undone the pain, but it gave me closure. Life goes on, and so will I.